again, everyone. And so I understand that one of the requests today for the Dhamma talk was to talk about Kamma. And so I thought this would be a good chance to talk about Kamma. So I hope you are okay with that. It's a obviously, a very important teaching in the Dhamma, in the Buddhism. And so I think it is appropriate to try to understand more about how Kamma works, and of course, very importantly, how we can make use of this kind of teaching in our spiritual life. Because at the end of the day, it's all about how we think about things. It's all about right view, understanding the world in the right view. One of the most powerful things in the Dhamma is right view. Right view stands at the very beginning of the Buddhist path. And so if you get right view, if you get right view right, yeah, you shouldn't get right view wrong. You should get wrong view right. No, you should get wrong view wrong. How does this work? I'm not sure how this works, but get right view right. Yeah, that's really important. Because when we have right view right, it means it supports all of the other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. Everything begins with right view. And because Kamma is an important part of this, we really want to understand it in the right way. And that should hopefully supercharge our practice a little bit, or at least give it a bit of extra oomph as a consequence. So I think it's a very useful thing to talk about. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Kamma and how it was viewed before Buddhism. Yeah, you may wonder, why on earth am I going to talk about what happened before Buddhism? And the reason is because to understand the Dhamma in the right way, you have to understand the context of the Dhamma. The context is the existing Indian culture, before the Buddha arose. That is largely the Brahmanical culture, the caste system with the Brahmins on top and all of that. And that Brahmanical culture looked at the world in a certain way. And the Buddhist teaching is, to a large extent, a reaction to that Brahmanical worldview. It was a criticism of the way the Brahmins thought about the world, and it was a new way, in a sense, of looking at reality. It was a big change from the Brahmanical point of view to the Buddhist point of view, which came afterwards. So if we can understand the Brahmanical way of looking at the world, we can also better understand the way the Buddha was thinking about reality. And Kamma, in the Brahmanical worldview, the Brahmanical worldview is found in all the Brahmanical or Hindu scriptures, the very early scriptures like the Rig Veda and the Upanishads and these kind of things, all the four Vedas and the Upanishads. And according to that worldview, Kamma is basically ritual. Yeah, it is about how to do rituals. And from the Brahmanical point of view, if you do your rituals in the right kind of way, then they are powerful. So it was about knowing how to do rituals. So, for example, if someone has died, then you have to do the funeral rites, and the funeral rites have to be done in a certain way. And when those funeral rites are done in a certain way, then the deceased person goes to heaven. And if they are done in the wrong kind of way, well, then the deceased person has a problem. Yeah, I don't know where they're going to go. They might have a very bad rebirth as a consequence. And so the Brahmins kind of had they had a stranglehold on the idea, on the rituals in ancient India. And because they had a stranglehold on that, this is how they could make a living. Yeah, if your deceased relative depends on the rituals of the Brahmins, whether they go to heaven or maybe they go to a bad rebirth, maybe they get reborn as a kangaroo. I don't know if you are in Australia, but kangaroo maybe, or as a ghost or something like that. Then you're going to pay those Brahmins a lot to make sure that your relative gets a good destination in the future. So they had a very strong hold on that society, and they've kind of had that hold on Indian society for a long time. I guess now in the present world, the Brahmins are very powerful in India, but they not quite in the same way as it was at that time. And so ritual, at that time, Kamma meant ritual, doing things in a certain sequence, doing certain things. That was kind of the how that world worked. And then the Buddha comes along, and then the Buddha says, well, actually, Ritual is okay, you can do rituals, but rituals in themselves don't have that kind of meaning. Yeah, rituals are not about doing things in a certain way or following a certain procedure. That is not what makes Kamma powerful. And the Buddha says what makes Kamma powerful and what really matters is intention. Chetana ahang bhikkhave kammang vadami. It is Chaitana monks, he was usually speaking to the monks, it is Chaitana monks and nuns, that I call Kamma, says the Buddha. So he changes the whole thing away from just rituals towards the idea of intentional actions. And this is one of the great revolutions in ancient India. Morality or doing things or the future rebirth or whatever you have, your future rebirth no longer depends on getting the rituals right. It depends on uh, what your intentions are. And if your intentions are good, then you have a good kind of future for yourself, and then that is what actually matters. So this is like a revolution in Indian society, a revolution how we understand things. And even in the present day, it is the case that not all religions have this view of intention, even with morality. In many religions in the present day, faith is more important. Yeah, it is what you believe in, not how you live your life. And so this is still quite extraordinary aspect of Buddhism that you don't find in many other places. That intention is so crucial to what our future looks like and what actually happens as a consequence of how we live. So he adds intention to action, and this is kind of the one of the revolutions of the Dhamma, and still a revolution, I would say, in large part in the present day. So what does this actually mean? What does it mean, intention? One of the questions that people sometimes ask is, well, if intention is what Kamma is, then maybe mental actions are more important than physical actions. Maybe our mind is more important than what we say. Yeah, you can see that because intention obviously is a mental thing. Does that mean that our minds, how we use our mind is more important than how we act or how we speak? That's an interesting question. What do you think about that? I'm just using some rhetorical questions. You don't have to answer, of course, because we're going to have a cacophony if everyone tries to answer these questions. But think about it for a second, right? If intention is the most important thing, yeah, it kind of makes sense to think that the mind is more important than your speech and your actions. So what do you think the Buddha says? And what the Buddha says is, it depends. There isn't either one or the other that is right. And I will give you some examples for what I mean by it depends. So one way of thinking about this is what I just said, because intention is what Kamma ultimately is, then the mind, in one sense, is more important than how we physically act and how we speak. Yeah, so you can see it from that point of view, that the mental component is actually the most significant thing. That's one way of thinking about that. Another way of thinking about this, there's some very interesting stories in the suttas. I don't know if you read the suttas, the word of the Buddha, but there are some remarkable things in there and some things that are really kind of mind-blowing. And when you read it, you think, wow, is this true, or is this just some vestige of Indian culture that has been kind of kept in the scriptures until the present day, but maybe they should have been thrown out a long time ago because it doesn't make any sense. Well, I think sometimes these strange things actually they make sense if you kind of understand the broader framework of things, yeah, the larger picture of things. And one of the things the Buddha says in there to show the power of the mind is that he says, well, imagine some kind of sage, some kind of seer living somewhere far away. Their meditation is really well developed, and then they project their mind onto a village which maybe has 30 or 40 people, and with one mental thought of hatred, they obliterate and they burn up and they reduce that whole village to ashes. Yeah, so then isn't that mental act more powerful than the physical act? If you tried to kill 40 people with your hands, you would probably fail. Yeah, you probably get killed yourself instead. And so again, yeah, the mental acts can be very, very powerful. But so this is just a way of saying that it depends. Yeah, in Buddhism, nothing is really very one-sided. It depends on the circumstances. But usually, the reality is that if you're going to, you know, incinerate a village and make it into ashes with one mental act of ill will, it takes a very, very powerful mind. And most of us haven't got that, thank goodness. Yeah, if some of us had got that, it would be kind of scary. If you go to the monastery and you don't know if these monks are kind of, what if this monk get angry with me and they have one thought of ill will, and suddenly you find yourself and you become a little pile of ashes on the ground. That would be kind of be scary, wouldn't it? So usually this is not how the mind. Usually these things don't happen ordinarily. So in ordinary life, the reality is that it is our actions by body and speech that are the most powerful. And the reason for that is because usually the mental acts that come and go very fast, and maybe you have a bit of ill will, you have a bit of desire or whatever. But if you don't act on it and you just allow it to kind of dissipate, its energy dissipates by itself, it's not very important karma. Yeah, so from this point of view, the really powerful karma is how we act and how we speak. Yeah. And so if you are able to follow the kind of normal precepts of Buddhism, the uh, five uh, the five precepts, I hope you're all keeping the five precepts, every one of you. If you get one thing away from this talk, if you haven't already committed to the five precepts, if you can do this based on this talk, I'll be really, really happy. Please commit to those five precepts, incredibly important. So if you keep those five precepts, well, then basically you are safe from so much bad karma as a consequence. And so that is where most people make bad karma, is actually through actions and through speech. And that is why we have to put most of our effort into that particular area when we in our practice. So you can see here how things are very, sometimes quite nuanced. Yeah, it depends on the angle upon which you look at these things. Sometimes the mental acts are worse, and sometimes the physical acts and the verbal acts are worse, depending a bit on the context and the viewpoint and these kind of things. So, uh, so the Buddha says intention is Kamma. The Buddha has many things to say about Kamma. There's some very important teachings about Kamma in the suttas. Why did the Buddha talk about Kamma? What is the reason? Have you thought about that? Why did the Buddha talk about Kamma? What is the purpose of that? And I don't know what you think, and very often an answer would be, well, he talked about Kamma because I want to have a good rebirth, and so I want to know about the causes of a good rebirth, and the causes of a good rebirth is good Kamma. Causes of a bad rebirth is bad Kamma, and so I want to know about that because I want a good rebirth. So is that a good idea to be too focused on your rebirth? It's very interesting. I often hear in Buddhist circles, people say things like, oh, it's very bad. We shouldn't be focused on a good rebirth. We should focus on being reborn as human beings, because who wants to be a deva? Yeah, if you are a deva, you can't practice properly. You can't meditate as a deva. Yeah, you just kind of enjoy yourself. You kind of indulge in pleasures for, a few million years. Actually, a few million years, right? Isn't that kind of cool? Who doesn't want pleasure for a few million years? Is there anyone here who wouldn't like pleasure for a few million years? It's pretty good already when you come to think about it. And so very often in the Dhamma, the way we talk about these things, we say we want to be reborn as a human being so that we can practice well. We don't want to be reborn as human beings. But did the Buddha ever say that? And this is one of those interesting things, is that the Buddha never really said that. The Buddha doesn't say anywhere in the suttas that we should not be reborn as human beings, as devas, that we should kind of lean towards being human beings instead. But this is one of these things that is very common in Buddhist circles. We are told that we should, move towards being a human being rather than being a deva, when in fact the Buddha has never said that. So my understanding of the suttas, it is okay to want to be reborn as a deva. It is okay to want to enjoy bliss and happiness and joy for a few million years. Yeah, it's okay. Of course we want that. Why would we not want that? It's the same thing we are human beings. If you can choose good food and bad food, what do you choose? You choose good food. If you can choose good entertainment or bad entertainment, you choose the good stuff. If you can choose a nice partner or a very nasty partner, you will choose the nice one. So we are naturally pleasure seeking as human beings. And because we are naturally pleasure seeking as human beings, it is okay to want to be reborn in the heavenly realm. There's nothing wrong with that. And this is one of those, I think, mistakes we have to get away from. This idea that actually it is that kind of desire is wrong and it is inappropriate. Much better than to think like that is just to live your life really well, practice really well, and then as you practice well, you allow your Kamma to take its course when you pass away. When eventually you pass away, your Kamma will take you in a certain direction. Don't try to control it. Don't try to become a human being. If you try too hard to control your Kamma and your future destination, I mean, do you know how to control that anyway? Do you know how to think so that you can become a human being? You could maybe try really hard to incline your mind towards becoming a human being, but deep down you still want to be a deva. Is it really going to work? And I think what very often happens is that we mess things up. Yeah, we just kind of, we don't really know what we're doing. We mess the whole thing up, and then we get reborn in a bad state because we don't know what we're doing anyway. So much better on your deathbed just to relax, to enjoy the process of dying. Yeah, dying is often a very pleasant and nice experience. If we enjoy it, we just let go because we're letting go very often of an old and sick body, and so it's kind of nice. You know, it's a similar kind of thing with this idea that on your deathbed, your last thought moment is incredibly important. But if your last thought moment is so important, imagine the kind of stress you have on your deathbed. Yeah, oh, I must not think a wrong thought. Oh, no, 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 don't think that. It's like saying to somebody, don't think about the white elephant. And as soon as you say that, you have to think about the white elephant. Yeah, this gets into your mind. Don't think a bad thought. Don't think about, no, no, don't think that. And it comes into your mind. And you get really stressed out because you know the last thought moment is so important. And then you don't know what to do. And wow, that's terrible on your deathbed. It's the last thing you want to do. So forget about those last thought moments, because there isn't any last thought moment anyway. No such thing actually exists, because death is a process, and that process you have to go through it. Yeah. So instead, enjoy the process, and as you enjoy the process, and you allow Kamma to take its course, as you probably, I think that is a far superior way of going through death. Then you can relax, then you can have a good kind of experience. So the Buddha taught Kamma to help us, yeah, get a good rebirth. That's part of the reason. But is it really a profound reason? Is that ultimately why he taught Kamma? And I think the answer is no. And the reason why it is no, because yes, then you get reborn in Devaloka, you bliss out for a few million years, okay, so you have a long holiday, like a really, really long holiday, yeah, and then you bliss out for a few million years. And then after blissing out, when you come to the end of that life as a deva, what happens then? And you don't know what happens then. Suddenly, it is as if that long holiday is over. Now you have to come back to maybe where you were before, or a far worse place. You don't know where you have to come back after that. And at that point, that whole holiday in the heavenly realm is like a dream. The reality now is that you're about to die as a deva, and you have to move on. Also, what taught Kamma is to understand the broader picture of reality, the larger picture of samsaric existence, how we move from one birth to another one, this eternal moving around from one place to another. Yeah, this is kind of part of that broader picture that he's talking about. And this is a very important reason why he talks about Kamma, because this is what you find, for example, in the three higher knowledges, the Tevijja, also maybe sometimes called the three kinds of insights. Yeah, the insight about rebirth is the first one. Yeah, the Buddha understood, he saw the kind of the round of rebirth. The second one is understanding the mechanism behind those rebirths. And the mechanism behind those rebirths is the force of Kamma. If you live well, you get a good rebirth. If you live badly, you get a bad rebirth. And you cycle around, going up and down, moving around, all of these places. And even if you have a long holiday in heaven, in that broader picture, that little holiday in heaven is not going to be that satisfactory. Yeah, in the broader picture, you're still kind of whirling around in this samsaric existence. And so the Buddha shows us how Kamma drives this whole round, now up, now down, and all of these kind of things. And there is no real controller behind this. There is no way that you can kind of force that kammic potency to always ripen in a certain way. There's no way you can control this to actually make this really powerful, or really good for yourself, rather, in the long run. And this is a very important point. I think sometimes when we think about the laws of Kamma, we think that, well, that means I can control. Yeah, I can decide what happens in my life. I can decide to be a good Buddhist or a good spiritual practitioner. I will get reborn in heaven. It gives me control to be in charge of Kamma. That's kind of our intuition in a sense. It comes from the sense of self inside of us. We feel we have a certain power, a certain ability to affect our actions in a certain way. But of course, that sense of self that we have, that we feel we can use to kind of control our Kamma, this is exactly what the Buddha talks about as the illusion of the sense of self. It's a fundamental problem. So actually, rather than we being in charge of where we are going, what is happening instead is that we are conditioned to live in a certain way. You may think now that you have chosen to be a Buddhist, you have chosen to live well, but actually that choice itself is conditioned. That choice arises out of cause and conditions. And because it arises out of cause and conditions, it is not as sure as it feels like. In fact, it is very, very uncertain. And so if you add the insight of non-self to the understanding of Kamma, you understand that actually you are not in charge at all. What is in charge are the cause and conditions that affect you in your life. And if you live in the right kind of place, if you have the right kind of parents and teachers and spiritual practitioners around you, then you go in a good direction. If you have the wrong kind of people around you, you will go in the wrong direction. And so your rebirth is never sure. You are never in charge of your Kamma. Rather, you get into this yo-yo existence, yeah, going up, going down, going in the middle, all of these kind of things. And that is the broader understanding of how Kamma drives the process of rebirth, especially when we understand it in terms of the idea of non-self. And this is why this idea of non-self is so important, because only then can you understand Kamma in the right kind of way. And this is how the Buddha talks about it in the Tevijja, in the sutras all the time. Yeah. So yes, rebirth is a little bit important. We make good Kamma to get a good rebirth, but we understand also the broader picture of Kamma. And I think this is the main reason why the Buddha, or one of the main reasons why the Buddha talks about Kamma in the sutras. But there is one other reason, a third reason, I should say, why the Buddha talks about Kamma. And that reason is because Kamma is also very important for our spiritual path. Yeah, if you are going to succeed in your meditation, if you're going to succeed to become a happier, more well-adjusted human being, more sociable, more at ease with the people around you, all the good things that come from living the spiritual life well, if all of those things, in other words, things that have to do with this life, not things that have to do with future lives or samsaric existence, you want to make good Kamma. One of the dangers of Buddhism is that we think of a good Kamma as being about future lives. But the Buddha says there's three kinds of Kamma. There's the Kamma that ripens in this life. There's the Kamma that ripens in your next life. And then there's the Kamma that ripens beyond that. Yeah, so we have already looked at the Kamma that ripens in your next life. We have looked at the Kamma which ripens beyond that, which is like the broader samsaric existence. But what about the Kamma that ripens in this life? And this is the whole point of the spiritual path. If you live well, you are creating supporting conditions right now for your spiritual practice. Yeah, and right here and now, you will be powerfully affected by how you live your life. Live your life well, and you will achieve so many of those mental qualities that are required for your path to actually work. If you are a generous person, and I would recommend all of you to be more generous than you are already. I'm sure many of you are already very generous, but make generosity an integrated part of your life because it's a very, very powerful thing. Yeah, I know some very, very generous people in my life. One of those very generous people is my teacher, Ajahn Brahm, who always does things for other people whenever he can, all kind of circumstances. Another one of these beautifully generous people is your teacher, Venerable Karunika. She's an incredibly generous person. I have known her for a long time, so willing to support almost anyone in any kind of situation. And what a beautiful thing that is. And every one of us should integrate more of that kindness and that generosity into our lives. Take every opportunity you have to do acts of kindness and generosity for people around you. And what you are building up is the good karma for the present life. Building up the inner qualities that enables this path to work. The meditation, the samadhi, all of those things will emerge out of that. So very, very important. And so this is another reason why the Buddha talks about Kamma, I think, because he understands the connections right here in this life. You may remember, one of the things that I have been teaching recently is the Mahamangala Sutta. Yeah, the Mahamangala Sutta, one of the favorite suttas in the world. If you go to some of the Buddhist countries, I can see some of you have a Sri Lankan background. Mahamangala Sutta is one of the beloved suttas that you will hear discourses about, that and the Metta Sutta and the Ratana Sutta. And one of the things it says in the Mahamangala Sutta is Patirupa Desa Vaso. Yeah, Patirupa Desa Vaso. I'm assuming you all know Pali really well, so I don't. Is that true? Okay, I'll translate it anyway. Even though you know Pali well, I'll translate it anyway. So Patirupa Desa. Patirupa means suitable. Desa is place. Vaso is living. Living in a suitable place. Yeah? No, sorry, that wasn't what I want to say. I want to say the next line of that word. Patirupa Pubbe katapunyata. Yeah? Pubbe katapunyata, when you're living in the right place and then having done good actions in the past. Yeah, that is what enforces or empowers that spiritual practice because you come into this life having done many good things in the past. It allows you now in this life to pursue the spiritual path in the right way. So in this life, we should make good karma to empower our path now. More, even just as important, if you get reborn again in your next life and you are carry on with your Buddhist practice, are you going to do that in your next life? Maybe. Is that your intention, or are you going to do something else in your next life? Okay, so assuming that you're going to be a Buddhist in your next life, carry on with your spiritual practice, you want to have done lots of good things in this life to support that practice in your future life. Yeah, I really recommend you to be a Buddhist in your next life as well, because sometimes you can't finish it all off in one life, so you have to carry on. Yeah, so do you know how to do that? Do you know how to be a Buddhist in your next life? Do you know how to maximize the chances of being a Buddhist in your next life? This is kind of interesting because this is also in the suttas. The Buddha actually says how we can do that. And the way to do that is, first of all, understand the Dhamma. And when I say understand the Dhamma, I don't mean discourses by people like me, yeah, because I don't, my Dhamma is kind of very vague and very uncertain and very unreliable. When I talk about Dhamma, I mean the word of the Buddha. You want to understand the word of the Buddha as profoundly as you can. That is really what is meant by Dhamma. Then when you get reborn into your next life, assuming you will be a Deva, I think many of you probably will be Devas, yeah, because you're practicing well. So you're reborn in Devaloka, and then when you get reborn in Devaloka, you have to find the Buddhist corner of Devaloka. You know that? When you go to heavenly realm, different corners, a Christian corner, atheist corner, Muslim corner, yeah, go to Buddhist corner of the heavenly realm. And then when you go there, yeah, or maybe you don't go there, maybe you're just kind of randomly moving around. One day you will hear the Deva speaking the word of the Buddha, because that's what devas do. What are devas going to do? After all, the devas, they are often reborn in heaven because they were Buddhist. Maybe they are Aryas. People sometimes say, "Oh, I don't want to be reborn in heaven." But if you want to be reborn with the Aryas, the noble ones, there is no better place you can go than going to a heavenly realm. So you go there, you wander around, and one day you hear someone reciting the Mahamangala Sutta, Pattirupa Desa Vaso, Pubbe Katapunyata. Wow, I know that. And then you know you're a Buddhist, and then you carry on with your practice. That's how it works. So two things you should do: really understand the Dhamma as the Buddha taught it. Secondly, practice as far as you can in this life, and then you are going to be a Buddhist also in your next life. So yeah, so I don't know if Venerable Karunika has taught you this before, but now you know that too. So yeah, coming back to what I was talking about before, do as much good karma in this life because it ripens right now. So now you have three good reasons why karma is important. Yeah, karma is important for your immediate rebirth. Karma is important to understand the cycle of birth and death, the samsaric cycle. And karma is important because it actually enables the spiritual practice here and now. Yeah, so this is why it really, really matters so much. So, having talked about why it matters, how can we make it work in our favor? And one of the very kind of interesting things in the sutras that you may not be aware of is that the Buddha says if everything, all the how we live, how we experience our life is based on karma, actions in the past, then there is no spiritual path. If everything is karma, if all our experiences are ultimately the result of karma that we have done in the past, the Buddha says there is no living of the spiritual life. Because if everything comes from karma, it means that our future is determined by karma. Karma determines everything, and then there is no way out. There is no movement for us, no ability for us to maneuver. We are trapped by that karma once and for all. And so this is one of the reasons why it is important not to think that everything in your life ultimately comes back to karma. It's a very common thing, I know, in many Buddhist cultures around the world to think that, this happened to me, it must be because of karma. I lost my job, or someone died, or I got an illness, or my partner is unfaithful, or whatever. And we say, what karma did I do in the past to deserve that? And very often it's got nothing to do with karma. It has to do with the human condition. Human condition is that sometimes you get sick, sometimes you break a leg, sometimes you get fired from work, sometimes you get sick, sometimes you die when you are young. Even that may not have anything to do with karma. And so karma is only one aspect of our lived experience. And that is incredibly important because it means that we are not trapped by the karma. It means that there is something we can do. Yeah, we can act, and our actions actually matter. It is not, karma is not the whole picture. So that is one point I want to make. Another point is that karma is not the same thing as habit. Yeah, habit is one way of thinking about why we do certain things. We do certain things because of habits. Kamma is another way of thinking about it. And these are actually different things. And so people may say things like, I have been reborn in a certain family because of my karma. But actually, no, the reason why you get reborn in a certain family is not because of karma, but usually because of attachment to certain people, craving for certain relationships or whatever. That is what gets you reborn in a certain family. But if you get reborn the difference in maybe a very poor family and very wealthy family, well, that may be due to karma, but not families that are roughly on the same level. That has more to do with attachments. And so one of the things in our life is to distinguish between habit and karma. We should not be too quick at kind of claiming that everything comes back to the idea of karma in our lives. It's actually more complicated than that. And again, that gives us another opportunity to do something about our lives. We are not as trapped as we think we are. So what can we do? And one of the important things that we can do is that we need to allow the Dhamma to penetrate in our life. Very often, if we go along with things, then basically we become the puppets of two things. And the two puppet masters is on the one hand Kamma, and on the other hand habit. Habits and Kamma kind of drive us towards doing certain things. Yeah, if you have a certain Kamma, you are a certain person in a certain way, you act accordingly. Yeah. If you have certain habits, you tend to act according to those habits. So to enable us to come out of that and to allow the Dhamma to percolate, come to the surface in our life, one of the important things that we have to do is actually to go more slowly. As we slow down, as we give the Dhamma a chance to arise in our mind, then we can take new actions. So the difference between an ordinary person who has no mindfulness is that they are driven by the habits and driven by the Kamma in the past. And these two things decide for them what they are going to do. Someone who has no mindfulness is just driven by these blind forces in their life, propelling them, pushing them in a certain direction, without really having the ability to reflect on those actions, whether they are right or not. But someone who is, wait a minute, why am I just following the habits here? What does the Buddha have to say in this case? What would the Buddha do in this particular situation or circumstance? What would some spiritually advanced person do? What would Ajahn Brahmali do? What might Venerable Karunika do in this kind of situation? I have a lot of respect for Venerable Karunika, and it's great that she is your teacher. What would she do in this situation? And then you stop yourself and you ask, what do the suttas have to say in this situation? And that is what allows the Dhamma to percolate and penetrate into your life, because you are slowing down a little bit. You are allowing the Dhamma to kind of arise in your mind. And this is one of the perhaps greatest dangers in the modern world. We don't allow the Dhamma to arise enough in our life. We are trapped by habits. This is one of the problems of being so busy all the time. This is one of the problems of using mobile phones too much. These are the things in our life that stop us, that make it very, very difficult to stop. We're always running, always moving forward, not having enough time to reflect properly, to stop and ask the question, are we heading in the right direction? Are we doing the right kind of thing here? And so it is very important that we try not to be too trapped by that world around us. We don't allow the mobile phones and the internet to take over our lives. But we actually have time when we put away the mobile phone. Yeah, we have times in life when we don't use the internet. And so that we have more opportunity to go a bit slower, to ask ourselves whether we are heading in the right direction or not. And then we can kind of move forward in a positive way. And I've been using the simile recently. I've been, sometimes in my kuti, my little hut here in Perth. Today is a really hot day over here, but not far from my kuti, I have a toilet. I have one of the best toilets in the world. It's an outdoor toilet. It's just a hole in the ground with a few planks over it. I really recommend that kind of toilet. And then you have fresh air. I have the incredible view in my toilet. I can see all the way to the Indian Ocean. I can see kind of almost to Sri Lanka. If it wasn't for the fact that the earth is curved, I could probably see Sri Lanka. But I can guarantee you the earth is curved. So if any of you is a flat earther, I have to disappoint you. The earth is actually round. Anyway, that's kind of a bit of a sidetrack. But I have this great toilet, yeah, with beautiful views and things like that. But there's a path that goes there. It's maybe 50 meters long or something. Yeah? And sometimes, because this is in nature, sometimes that path is overgrown. And when the path is overgrown, sometimes I think, okay, I've got to chop down this tree. I've got to kind of sort everything out. The agent inside of me wants to do things straight away to sort out what is wrong. But then I stop and I ask myself, do I really need to act straight away? Maybe there's no need to act straight away. Maybe what I should do instead is just wait a little bit. And sure enough, if you wait a little bit and you stop a little bit, you realize actually there is an alternative route. I can walk a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. I don't need to chop down that tree straight away. Or if you wait a little bit, you realize there's a dead tree over there. I can get rid of that dead tree instead. Or if you wait a little bit, the bushes change again because nature is always changing and you find another way around. And I realize that very often in life we are too reactive. And instead of being so reactive, we need to learn to respond instead. Respond to the situation. And sometimes that responding means taking a step back, waiting a little bit, asking yourself, is there an alternative solution? Much better not to cut down any trees. Much better not to have to remove any branches, finding the way around. Much better not to say those bad words or do the bad actions or even think the bad thoughts, but find a way around. How can I have compassion for this person? How can I think about them in a positive way? Yeah? And then you are allowing your Kamma to change. You're no longer trapped by the Kamma of the past or trapped by the habits of the past, but instead you're taking a new trajectory, opening up the possibility of overcoming those bad habits you had in the past because you stop, because you are circumspect, because you have appamada in your life. Instead of being pamada, which is negligent, you have appamada, which is the idea of being heedful and careful and intelligent and wise and having yoniso manasikara about how you live your life. And this is how we emerge from the being trapped by the Kamma of the past. So I'm going to come to the end now because I've been going for 45 minutes already. But I would really recommend you to think about Kamma in a positive way. Think about Kamma in a way that I've been talking about now. Remember three incredibly good reasons to consider Kamma. It will lead to a good rebirth in your next life. Yeah, that's already very useful. Don't feel bad about wanting to have a good rebirth. It will lead you to understand the samsaric existence, the whole round of rebirth more completely, and that will drive your interest in the spiritual path because actually it is not very nice, the idea of samsaric existence. And finally, if you understand Kamma in the right way, it will supercharge your spiritual practice right now if you understand how to do it well. Yeah, living, taking every opportunity to do what is right, to do what is good, and to live in the right way. If you do that, guaranteed, you will have a far more successful spiritual practice as a consequence. So, that is all I want to say about Kamma. There's much, much more that could be said about Kamma because it's a very, very broad topic. But I think for now that is enough. And so I'm going to allow you all to ask questions and basically say what you like. If you want to comment on anything I have said or whatever, please feel free to do so. Does anyone have anything they'd like to comment on? Anything I said that wasn't clear? Anything you disagree with? I think, wow, what is this monk talking about? Anything that you just like to ask? It doesn't have to be a question about the talk tonight. If you have anything else you'd like to talk about, you are very welcome to do so. So please fire away, to use a violent metaphor. I shouldn't be using violent metaphors, but anyway, please go for it.
Hello, Bante. Can you hear me?
Hello, Ruma. Yes, I can absolutely hear you.
It
Yes,
was such a wonderful, profound talk. Thank you so
yes.
much.
Great.
Yeah. So if we face an adverse event, like something adverse happens to us in our life,
Mm,
I can relate to what you said. Most of the traditional Buddhist countries, as traditional Buddhists, we always say, "Oh, this is a result of my past karma."
mm,
And in some ways, it is a way of understanding why it happens to us.
mm, mm.
It's not always a negative connotation.
Right.
If you can get
Yes.
past it. Um, but the question is, if some people have like ongoing stress, one after the other, how can we help such a person?
If someone has one stress after the other, right. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, let me just comment on what you say about, attributing suffering to karma in the past. It's not always bad. I agree with you. Sometimes people need a sense of understanding and closure, and sometimes it can be helpful to look at it that way. And it gives them a feeling that there is some kind of sense in the world. It's not kind of completely random and bad, and all of these things can be helpful. So I agree with that. The danger, in my opinion, is that we feel that okay, now I understand, why it happened. So now I just have to not do it in the future, and then if I don't do it in the future, I won't have those bad results again. But actually, that doesn't really work that way because many of these things are not really about karma. They are just about the lived experience of being human. And so sometimes we take away the wrong lessons. The right lesson to take away is that life in general is problematic. Yeah, that is kind of the right lesson. And if you understand that life in general is problematic, we can expect all of these things in our life. And it's almost impossible. It is impossible to avoid it. Um, then it encourages us to practice the spiritual path, not just to make good karma, but it encourages the entire Eightfold Path because we understand that actually we need to do more than just do the right kind of karma or whatever. And so that is what I would say is the so you are right. And on the one hand, on the other hand, I would say that there is also more to it. So you're both right, and there is more to it at the same time. So we probably are on the same page on that one, I think. Yeah. So now coming to the other question you had about what to say to someone who has just one hardship after the other. Well, if that is the case, it can be due to bad karma in the past. Yeah, it can because if there's an enormous amount of hardship, then the more the hardship is, the more likely it is to be due to bad karma. And so what to say to them is that, well, that karma is limited. Yeah, one day it will come to an end. And because of that, all you have to do is you have to try your very, very best just to carry on with those difficulties. And don't allow those difficulties to drag you down to the point where you start doing silly things. Because the moment you start doing silly things, you're actually worsening that karma, is making it even worse. One of the very simple teachings that the Buddha gave is that we should always dilute our bad karma. And so this person too, if they are able to somehow, accept those problems. By accept, I don't mean not care about them. I just mean that, okay, this is my life. I've got to deal with it somehow. And they can accept that and at the same time live a good life. Then they will be diluting that bad karma and gradually they will emerge from it. Gradually, that kind of nightmare of having a terrible life, one thing after the other, it will gradually fade away. And gradually it will seem like a dream. Yeah, and once they come out of it, it's like, it's this wonderful sense of progress, a wonderful sense that the spiritual path really works. And that is incredibly encouraging when you see that. I think anyone who practices the spiritual path well will recognize that you somehow are emerging from some darkness of the past, some problems of the past, and you're becoming gradually a more well-adjusted, happy, and reasonable person as a consequence. So something like that is what maybe I would say. Do you have any further comments, Rumi? Yeah.
I think it's a good answer. Sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah. Great. I think there was some. Let me have a look. I think there are some questions in the chat. Is that true? Let's see. Okay. Okay, so we have one here. We have, what do you think about backburning to control bushfires in summer? Okay, so um, I think that, like with everything in life, what whether something is good or bad depends on your intention. Yeah, and I think that the majority of people who do backburning, they have good intentions, and because they have good intentions, then it's a good thing to do backburning from that point of view. I'm not capable of taking a position on whether backburning as such is good or bad. I don't know about that. I have no idea. I know that there are different opinions. But in terms of karma, I would say that depends on the intention of the person doing it. And I think most people will have good intentions, and so in that sense, it is okay. However, you should take into account the dangers of backburning. Yeah, backburning can obviously have very negative consequences for a lot of animals. I understand a lot of animals can die in these kind of situations. And of course, that's terrible. And so we should try to do something to maybe evacuate the animals first of all, or somehow kind of do some chanting to get them to leave, or do something positive to reduce the suffering for the animals. Yeah, whatever we can, and maybe go into the bush or forest and bang some drums or something, so the animals kind of run away before they, before the bushfire. That way we can make better karma. Yeah, through the backburning. Yeah. So that's kind of how I think about that. The backburning itself, I can't really say too much about. Okay, next question. I have a 16-year-old son. I'm a bit worried because he said he is not a religious person or atheist. How to make him interested in Buddhism? For information, I meditate every day and try to take him to the vihara whenever possible. So don't try too hard to take him to the vihara, because if you try to take him to the vihara, he will probably rebel if he's not interested. Tell him that he can do whatever he wants with his life. Tell him that it's up to him. It is his life, and it's for him to choose what he wants to do. Yeah, and then he will start thinking for himself. Then he will start to realize whether there is a real benefit to the Dhamma or not. If you push him, he will never have the encouragement to think for himself. He will just rebel against his parents because they are trying to push him. But if you say he can do whatever he wants, he will have to take responsibility. And when he takes responsibility, he will have to make that choice himself. This is, in my opinion, the best way to make people succeed in becoming Buddhist. This is what happened in my family. When I became a Buddhist monk, my parents were literally not very happy. You can imagine, I grew up in Norway. My parents are very non-religious people, and they thought Buddhism was some kind of crazy cult that I would be brainwashed. And of course, I got brainwashed. That's why I'm here. So they were right about that part. But it's a good brainwashing, so it's okay. But gradually, by me not trying to convert them or whatever, they almost became Buddhists. Yeah, and today my family members, they are kind of dying off slowly, but those who remain, they are very interested in Dhamma, basically. And so that is often the best way, not to push them, but to gradually allow them to understand why this works. And remember that the most important thing is really to be an example. If you can be an example of a person who has special qualities, who is kind or whatever, then they will look to you as an example in their own life, and they will change accordingly because you are a good example. That is more important. So that is I know that probably what I'm saying now goes a bit against kind of traditional Buddhist values and ways of thinking about things, but sometimes we need to do these things in different ways than what we are used to. And so that will be my answer. So, okay, so someone called Nilakshi missed most of the talk, but here I am. Okay, well, so I can't really answer to that one, so I can say, better luck next time. See how it goes. Then we have the Yinghua's response to what I said. Yes, the Aboriginals did it in a controlled way, right? So they did the backburning in a controlled way. Which probably is to save the fauna and the animals or whatever, so you don't have a very great. It doesn't have the same kind of problems. That's probably what we should be doing as well. Sometimes they call it control burns, but sometimes the control burns are a bit out of control. That's what happens. So I'm not sure. It's kind of one of those unfortunate things. We had a few of those here in Western Australia. It's supposed to be a control burn. It ended up burning down people's houses. So that's kind of not so good. So we should certainly be careful. So anything else that anyone would like to say? We still have a couple of minutes left, if you like. So here we have another one. Ajahn, are animals generally reborn in the animal realm again, or it also depends on their karma? I would say that generally they are reborn again in the animal realm. And the reason is because when you have a very strong karma that makes you reborn in the animal realm, it means you tend to stay there for a long time. And you find this in certain similes in the sutras, where they say that you kind of you stay there for a long time before you get reborn back in the human realm. But eventually, it does depend on your karma. So it depends on why you are reborn in the animal realm. Sometimes you are reborn there with a karma that is not very strong. Maybe you did one stupid thing, and so you get reborn there. Then you can get reborn back in the human realm again very quickly. But if you are generally a bad person and you get reborn in the animal realm because of that, it can take a very long time before you come back to the human realm again. Yeah. So if you, the more good karma you do, the better. So even if you make a few mistakes in your life, it's not going to be all that significant for you. That is kind of I think, the lesson to be drawn from that. So please don't get reborn as an animal. Yeah, the kangaroos might seem cute, or the dog may seem very happy in that family's life, but that is often just an illusion. So be very careful. Question from Rumi. This is not a Dhamma question, Rumi. Are you coming to Sydney anytime soon? This is that depends on many factors that I do not know. It depends on whether I get invited. It depends on whether Ajahn Brahm will allow me to go. Yeah, he's holding on to me more and more these days, so not sure. So maybe if I get an invitation, and maybe if Ajahn Brahm, yeah, then maybe I will come to Sydney. Yeah. And so see what happens. Team up with Venerable Karunika and see how things go. Something like that. Okay, one last question. What about domestic pet dogs who are loved and who never do anything to break the five precepts? Well, the problem is that, animals have very weak intentions. So they may not break the precepts, but they don't really have the intention to be kind either. And so they're not really making much good karma because the intention is not really there. And that is the problem with being an animal. So it's not really, it's not still a lot of dukkha to be an animal. Even a domestic pet is a lot of dukkha because you don't really understand the world very well. You don't know what to do. You don't understand the Dhamma. Lots of problems because of that. Final one, maybe if we gave enough good karma. Yeah, maybe you have to make more good karma, really. I don't know. Yeah. How about human slaughter men and hunt? Following on animal discussion, how about human slaughter men and hunters? Yeah, so human beings slaughtering other human beings, very bad karma. Yeah. Hunters who kill a lot of animals, also very bad karma. And so this is really negative. So please don't be a hunter. Please keep those five precepts really strictly because they are kind of the gateway, the basis for all of these things. Yeah. I hope actually they actually become the animals they kill. Now, please don't think like that. Please don't think like that because if you think like that, it's not helpful. Remember that if people are hunters and they kill animals, they don't understand. Yeah, they are blind. They are deluded. They don't really want to hurt anyone. It's just that they are just stupid. Yeah. So remember that people who do these things actually they are deserving of compassion because they don't really understand the world. Never think no one really deserves happiness. We should really be spreading metta to everyone in the whole world, yeah, because basically everyone is deluded and stupid. That is the reality of things. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. It's been wonderful to be with you and spend this time together. I wish you all the very best.